Is that my cue? Do I?
That is your cue.
Okay. Hang on a minute. Something's on my screen here. I need to.
That's the recording, yeah.
Yeah, it says recording in progress. It has a new way of doing it.
Okay. Well, anyway, it's my pleasure to introduce Tammy Ayer. I've known Tammy for about probably 5 years, 4 or 5 years anyway. And I'm a big fan of her writing. The reason why I'm a big fan of her writing is that I'm a retired newspaper journalist myself. I was in it for 40 years, and I know a good journalist when I read one and see one. And she's a human interest writer, which human interest reporter, which is what I was when I was back in active. And my feeling is that those kinds of stories are really what give a newspaper personality. You could even say soul, rather than just the straight news stuff, reporting on meetings and killings and so forth, And it takes a special kind of reporter to be a good human interest writer. The reporter needs to be empathetic, the kind of person who can see and feel where the person or persons they are interviewing are coming from. Do that and still stay far enough removed from the story to be objective and not let their empathy influence the facts. Tammy is that kind of reporter, and she does a really good job at it. I'm going to give you a little bit of biographical information from her, which she has provided me. She has worked on 4 different newspapers. She's from Indiana originally. She was born in Indianapolis and grew up around the west central part of Indiana, moving every few years because when she was growing up, her dad was office manager for Public Service Indiana, which is the state's electric utility. It is now Duke Energy. She graduated from high school and college in Terre Haute, Indiana, went to Indiana State University, double major in journalism and history, then a master's degree in history. After graduating, after her master's degree, she went to work for a small paper, the Brazil Times. And I didn't know there was a Brazil, Indiana, but that's about a half hour from Terre Haute. She started by covering the school board and did a little bit of everything for about 2.5 years. It was a small daily, about 7,500 circulation. Then she moved to the Terre Haute Tribune Star, worked in a bureau for the first couple of years, then in the main office. There she stayed there for 10 years. This was a bigger newspaper, about 34,000 circulation. She was a reporter, then she moved into various editorial positions, assistant city editor, interim city editor, and features editor. Then she moved to her third paper in Fort Myers, Florida, the Fort Myers News Press, which is the largest paper she has worked at. During the snowbird season, circulation would swell to about 120,000, so much bigger than Terre Haute. She was the night city editor. She was assistant features editor and features editor. She also edited the upscale magazine Grandeur, not pronouncing that right, Grandeur, for 4.5 years. did very little writing, and she missed the writing. Worked there. She worked there for 13 years. Her fourth paper is our own Yakima Herald Republic. Since June 2015. She and her husband were ready to leave Florida, and a trip to Oregon convinced us that we needed to come to the Pacific Northwest. She was hired as a features editor, and she also does occasional editing, but soon realized that her first love is reporting, and that's what I wanted to do. She writes about missing, and I'm sure you've all seen her ongoing series on missing and murdered Indigenous people and other news on the Yakima Reservation. And she does many features on people and all kinds of things, history, architecture, and she's willing to write just about anything as long as it doesn't involve meetings run by public officials or politics. And I'm right in there with you on that one, Tammy. Uh,
Yeah.
in her spare time, when she has spare time, she reads, runs, and I see her running by my house all the time. She hikes, and she fosters and cares for several cats, and she collects vintage clothing, books, and other vintage odds and ends. She is a mid-century modern buff, and she originally wanted to be an architect, among other careers, but she's always been a writer, and she loves it. She's a very curious person and enjoys meeting other people and learning something new every day. Tammy, turn it over to you.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you. And I really appreciate your praise. I admire Ed's writing equally. So, and it's always nice to get together with other writers, and we get together every now and then. I want to give you a heads up. Speaking of cats, I have a couple of foster kittens here. So if you see me, one's on my lap right now, so it might move. We'll try to keep them out of the meeting. And actually, I noticed on social media, when you get memories that come up, today was the day I flew here. This was literally the day, this is the 6th anniversary of the day that I moved here. And how that went down was, my husband was already here in March. He got the job at the paper first. He came here in March, and then I packed up the house and sent the house contents in my truck 2 weeks ahead of me. So they drove out here, and then I flew out here with the cats. So that was interesting, but I didn't realize that was today. So I want to start off with a quote that was a favorite of mine, and I had it on a T-shirt that I bought at a journalism, a writing convention or something, and it said journalism with a semicolon, and it said history on the run. And that's kind of the way I look at it, and that's kind of how I treat this business. I have always been an avid reader and an avid writer. When I was a little kid, I'd just make up stories, and I did want to be I've always been interested in history, so I kind of along the way thought about being a history teacher. I thought briefly at one point I wanted to be a pharmacist, and then I took advanced chemistry, and that didn't work out so well. I blame my lack of an architectural career on the teachers I had for algebra. But when I got into college, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I thought, well, I'll get a history degree, and then I'll get a master's, and then I'll get a PhD. I thought that might be. But the advisor I was working with was the head of the journalism school, and he said, well, you like to write and you like to meet people. Why don't you try journalism? And I thought, okay. I wasn't on the high school paper or anything like that. I mean, I hadn't really thought about it. So I tried it and I liked it. Really enjoyed it. Worked for the college newspaper. And then when I graduated, I was almost a double. I wrapped up a couple of classes in history afterwards, so I got that double major. And then I went back and I got my master's in history. And even at that point, I thought, I might go back and get my PhD, but I got a job at the Brazil Times. And the funny thing, Ed, you weren't aware of a Brazil, Indiana. The big landmark there is, it's kind of a memorial wall, and it has a fountain in the middle. And it was given to the city by the country of Brazil. We had a really colorful mayor there for a long time who took a lot of international trips, probably on the taxpayer's dime. We were always trying to figure out where his money and where some of the other things he had came from. He's passed now, but yeah, at one point, the country of Brazil gave the city of Brazil this big wall. I assume it's still there. But, you know, in the 2.5 years that I was there, I mean, you can't get much more local than that. I covered just about everything. I did have to cover city council meetings. I had to cover county council meetings. They don't have those here. In Indiana, the commissioners are the legal arm of the county government, and then the county council is the fiscal arm. So they're split. So I had to cover both of those at different times. I also had to cover a hospital board for a while. They had a different setup with their hospital governing there. So, but the most interesting thing was the school board. I had to cover that from the beginning, and school boards are very different in Indiana and Florida than they are here. The school board members have a lot more power than they do here. They can raise taxes just on their own. They have to have 2 public hearings, and then if everybody on the board approves, they can raise taxes. They don't do levies. Also, usually school board elections are really hotly contested, and school board members people do a lot of mudslinging to get on school boards, which that's just kind of crazy. But the board that I covered was really entertaining. They used to try to meet really late to see if the reporters would leave. So at times I would be there until, 10 or 11 o'clock at night or at midnight. And one of the board members got into a physical altercation with the superintendent. I wasn't at that meeting, but that was crazy. So I can't imagine that happening here, but you never know. A couple of the big stories that I covered there were during the Iraq War. We had the highest ranking POW was from Brazil. If I recall correctly, he was a colonel in the Air Force, and his plane got shot down and he was captured. So I got all the first dibs on the interviews with him after, while I talked to his mom. She still lived there in town. Talked to her, got the latest information. Then when he was released, I got the first interview with him. And I got to know him fairly well, and sometimes I still wonder what he's doing now. One of the other big topics that came up occasionally was school consolidation. Indiana went through a big, massive school consolidation in 1966 into the early 70s, which caused a lot of angst. And the district that I covered the whole county, but there was also a school in the county that was still kind of independent. And they were always, the school board was always threatening to kind of annex them and pull them into the school district. And there was always a lot of drama about that. And then just one of the most memorable papers there was it was the New Year's Day paper. So it had a big banner across the top and it said, Happy New Year. And we had so much breaking news that day. If I recall correctly, we had a lumberyard that burned down, a man that was arrested for rape, a man that was arrested for killing his brother, and a woman who was blown across the street when her house blew up. And all across the paper, it said Happy New Year. I wanted to get a copy of that paper and I couldn't. They were sold out everywhere. It was, and later I had to cover the trial of the guy the rapist, which was, that's another thing I've had to cover several court trials and I don't really enjoy that. So I was there for about 2.5 years. Our editor was a real character. He's since passed, but I did learn a lot from him. And then I moved on to Terre Haute, and there for 10 years, I did again cover a little bit of everything. I didn't ever have to cover city council or county commissioner meetings there. That was another county. But some of the stories that I was involved with there were, I don't know how many fans of the Indianapolis 500 we have here, but the family that bought the Indianapolis 500 racetrack in 1945, I think it was 45, 44, that was Tony Holman. They're from Terre Haute. And the family recently, well, it would have been in the last couple of years, I believe, they sold all their race. They're out of the race business now, the family is. But I wrote a 3-part series about how the family came to Terre Haute and the impact that they had. That was the longest project I've ever worked on. It was a 3-part series and it took about 6 months. It was supposed to be the start of a book, but I haven't written that book yet. So I don't know when I'll get around to that. I also covered the arrest and the trial of Orville Lynn Majors. He was convicted of killing 7 people. He was a nurse. They think he may have killed up to 24 people. He worked at a hospital and he's passed too. He died. He was on death row in Indiana and he's passed. And then this was back in the day when newspapers would send you to other places or even other countries to cover things. I got to cover the 50th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz because a lady in our coverage area, Eva Moses Core, she and her sister were at Auschwitz. They were twins. Dr. Mengele, they had to suffer through experiments with Dr. Mengele. And she opened a Holocaust museum in Terre Haute, and she's still, I believe she's still living. But I got to go with her to that, and to see that was one of the most amazing, that's some of the most amazing stories I've ever covered. I was there. She publicly forgave a German doctor who was working at the camp then. So that was really quite something. And then we were there for 10 years. Then we were ready for a change. A friend of mine went to the Fort Myers paper, so we went there. Some of the more unusual things that we had to deal with there were alligator attacks. While I was there for 13 years, a few people died because of alligator attacks. In fact, one happened right after I got there. We would also usually have several people throughout the year be struck by lightning. I think Florida is either the lightning capital of the country or one of the lightning capitals of the world. That's a real issue down there. And of course, hurricanes. We went through 2 hurricanes personally, and then lots of tropical storms. It was always interesting during season to see what life was like when the tourists and the snowbirds came to town. It's kind of hard to imagine that, but literally tens of thousands of people came to that area, came to Fort Myers, Bonita Springs, Naples, that coast. And mostly on that coast, it was Midwesterners. And then on the East Coast, it was people from New York and Massachusetts. But that made a huge difference in what life was like. So that kind of got to us after a while. It's just really difficult. It really impacts every aspect of your life. A couple of the more, and I'm trying to keep an eye on my time so I don't talk too much, because Ed knows we could talk about this a lot. I mean,
Yeah.
you sit there and think about memorable stories that you've covered or that you've edited, and it's just, boy, there's a lot. There's a lot. I mean, one of my favorites from Fort Myers was, I was editing, I mean, like I said, I was an editor most of the time I was there. I did write a few stories toward the end, but I was the editor on the night when a live torpedo was found at a scrapyard in Fort Myers. I don't remember exactly. I think the guys working at the scrapyard were cutting up some pieces of metal, and it was a torpedo. I don't know, that nobody knows how it got there. It's hard to say, but he started to cut into it, and it was clear that it was a live torpedo. So then they had to get the Army, like they had the Army National Guard come in, and they had to transport it very carefully in this really slow moving caravan outside of town where they diffused it, or whatever they did. But and then I'd forgotten about this, but they opened up a new airport, and the first plane to leave was a plane back to Germany. We had a ton of German tourists come to that area. And the first plane that was supposed to leave the new airport was going back to Germany, and it had to come back because one of the engines failed. And so I remember afterward, we talked to some Germans, and they were not very happy about having to come back. They really wanted to get home. And then the other thing that was interesting was, because there were so many snowbirds, they would have all their fundraisers during the winter. That's when they had most of them. And Naples has a really big wine festival every year where they make just millions of dollars to benefit different organizations. And then the one in Fort Myers, one of the big supporters was Cliff Williams, who's a member of AC/DC. Clearly, AC/DC did very well in holding on to all their royalty rights because right before we left, Cliff had just bought a new yacht. So, but it was always kind of wacky to see a member of AC/DC at this big wine festival that happened every year. And then, yeah, so we came out here in Oregon. We went out to Oregon for a professional track meet, and we just really liked it. Reminded us more of Indiana. We really missed the change of seasons. And we really just were tired of, it gets hot out here, but it's extremely humid there. Just kind of the combination of the humidity, the hurricanes, just the big swell of people in the wintertime. We said, well, we're done with Florida. And so we came out here, and we love it out here, and we want to stay out here. We love the mountains. My husband lived in Palm Springs for 2 years, and he kind of missed the mountains. So I think he likes it here. So And yeah, here I'm just, I took a few notes just to try to remember. I just really missed writing, and I'm so glad that I wasn't required to be an editor here and that they let me write, because I really enjoy it. I'm always curious, and some people might say I'm nosy. You have to be kind of nosy to be a reporter. But I just really like meeting new people, and I really like learning, and I am just fascinated by people. I'm always asking a lot of questions. One of my favorite questions is to ask couples how they met, because those are some great stories. I really enjoy those. But here, yeah, I've been writing a lot. It's going on 3 years now, I think, that I've been writing about missing and murdered Indigenous persons. I've never lived in an area that is a reservation. When we were in Florida, the Miccosukee Reservation was south of us, but we didn't really cover it. They literally lived in the Everglades and were pretty remote, that reservation, and kind of scattered, much smaller than the Yakima Reservation, land-wise and tribal citizen-wise. Very small tribe, and just very scattered. And I don't know if any of you remember, this was not long after I got here. I wish I could have written this story, but I couldn't. I was still editing at that point. But I remember a state trooper pulled over a speeding driver somewhere around Natchez, I think. And the guy had gone to pick up a pizza somewhere, and he tried to bribe the trooper with the pizza. But I don't know if anybody remembers that, but I just thought that was so funny. I was like, that's the kind of story I would like to write. I thought it was hilarious.
Yeah.
Needless to say, he kept the pizza and he got a ticket. So, and then, yeah, some of those early stories that I did a story about women who fight mixed martial arts. I mean, that's one of my favorite things. I like to write inspirational stories, and I like to write stories about, I write some really dark stories, and Ed knows. I mean, sometimes you get in that place where you're just writing, it seems like it's just dark. It's hard some days. You think, gosh, it's just hard. And then other days, people are overcoming great obstacles. They're accomplishing goals. And I think those stories need to be out there too. So, this brings us to the point, and we could people talk for hours about this, about the business of journalism and how much it's changed. I like to say that when the internet came along, newspaper owners did not see the impact, did not anticipate the huge impact that would have. And I remember my second paper, the Tribune Star, when we first started putting stuff online, and kind of how clueless and how different it was then. But the big issue now for newspapers, we've lost we've lost a good bit of advertising to social media. And I have to say, even between Fort Myers and here, I've seen the impact of social media change dramatically. I remember when Facebook started to get popular, and we were told, don't friend people that you might cover, and don't get too close. There was always this line between journalists, kind of, you have to stand apart, you have to. And, you do need to be objective, but at the same time, that's changed so much now. Like I report on friends, people I know on Facebook. I get quotes from people on Facebook. Social media is an integral part. So the future of journalism right now is, we're trying to figure out, people are always going to want news, but how do they want it delivered? And how can that continue in the way that we're used to? I mean, clearly we're going to have to change. We've seen lots of businesses change. Elevators don't really have elevator operators anymore. Telephones don't have, people who have to connect each other literally. So how do newspapers adjust to that? And there's some potential out there. I know that there's a lot of talk about foundations maybe running newspapers as a public service, because I do believe that local news is a public service, and I think there are ways to do that. It's just kind of finding those financial models that will help continue that. Again, I think the sky's the limit right now, but people have to think about options. And the difficulties of the journalism business have been, like everything else, exacerbated by the pandemic, in that as the number of journalists out there shrinks, we had this pandemic, and it has sucked up, and rightly so, it has sucked up a lot of time on our parts. We all have kind of our special beats that we're interested in, that we feel passionate about. And we've had to take time from that. But this is a pandemic, and it's also illustrated how important it is to have local reporters writing about local news. And there's been so many things that have come out of this, and this is going to have long lasting effects. And we're still trying to figure out the ways that we're going to cover that in the future. We have been able to pull back. I've been able to pull back a little bit on my coverage. And I think you've seen lately, you know, we've been trying to cover some court trials that have been happening again in person. These are important. Sometimes it's hard to, court trials, they take up a lot of time, but recently we've been covering some that we think are really important. And so we've been there for those. But, you know, I always tell people, I don't care if you're a journalist or not, if you have any ideas on how we can deliver the news better, how we can sustain local news, and how people like myself can keep doing what we love. I have other options. You know, there are other careers that I've been interested in and that I could move into. But I really do love what I do, and I hope to continue it as long as I can. So I'm always open. There are things I'm always looking for ideas, story ideas too. So I just tell people, I don't care where I am. I hand out cards kind of indiscriminately, and I say, if you have a story idea that has to do with your business or yourself, or if you know a neighbor who does something interesting, there's a lot of great stories out there, and I'm just always asking. I'm always looking for those because I'm curious, and I can't imagine I'll ever stop being curious. And I do feel privileged and thankful that people are willing to trust me with their stories. Sometimes it's very hard, and not everybody wants to talk to the paper, and I respect that. And I try to consider myself, if somebody wanted to interview me, depending on what it was, how would it play out? Would I want to go there? But I think I appreciate that people trust me with their stories, and I try to do the best I can. And I really want them to be memorable. And I don't think people may remember certain stories, but you know what? I want them to resonate. I want them to accurately record what we know now and any history from the past for the future, because I'm always a historian, and I kind of look at it that way. So, that's pretty much it. I don't, that's kind of it in a nutshell. I just really like what I do, and I think it's important. So I take questions if anybody has any questions.
Tammy, I have a question for you. Can you talk a little bit about what happened to communities when the newspaper fails? You know, I just read an article about, for example, corruption at city government. If there's no one bird dogging, that's just an example, but talk about that a little bit, about what happens in communities where there's no paper.
Well, and that's, you know, it really skews the conversation. And when I think about, for instance, our coverage of the health board, and I'm not going to get deep into that, but we know that the health board and some of these related issues concerning the pandemic have really resonated in the community, and it's important that we keep that word out there. When you don't have a local newspaper that kind of serves as that pillar, or a local news source. I'm not going to sit here and, again, newspapers are changing, and we all have to adjust to the future, but there has to be a reliable source of news in the community, or else you get, and we've seen this, you get a conversation that's not only uninformed, and people can always go to public meetings. And I think people should go to public meetings concerning issues. Not that I'm a big fan, but I have been to all of them. I've been to all kinds of public meetings. And if there's an issue that you're concerned with, you need to be there. But at the same time, not everybody can do that. And it's our role, or a trustworthy news source, to report what happens. And again, I think of that for the future. There might be somebody 50 years from now who's looking up something that needed to, there might be a historian, there might be a teacher, something needs to be documented. But when you lose that local news source, I just think of the conversation going in the wrong direction. First of all, we know that social media, while it can do a lot of good, it can also spread a lot of misinformation. part of the problem is misinformation gets out there and then it gets amplified. So that's part of the problem. But then the community needs to be, I feel like we are a connector and that we support conversation in the community. And if that's not happening, you're going to miss out on those things. So for instance, you know, we had a reporter who covered Wapato for quite a while. There was all kind of craziness going on there, money and other issues. And sadly, we've lost her, and we haven't gotten back to that point. And I know that we're hiring more reporters, which is great. But that's some coverage that wouldn't have been there. And again, if we didn't have that local newspaper, or we didn't have someone who could take the time to cover the health board, I'm not sure what all would have come out there. It's just hard to say. I feel like we try to keep the public informed and keep the conversation informed, I guess. And when you lose that, things kind of go off in every possible direction, including all kinds of crazy. So that's how I feel about that. Yeah, it's the conversation. Like we're
Tammy, what about the disappearance of the Native American women in this area? Where is that going?
well, you know, Delma, that's a great question, and we've been talking about that lately. We feel okay. So this all started. My coverage, first of all, like I said, I've never been involved in actively covering issues on a reservation. Again, Indiana has no reservations per se, as we know here. That's because of its history, and people were forced out. Native people were forced out. There are tribes that have offices in Indiana, but there's not a reservation, as we know here. And, you know, Washington, I believe, has 29 federally recognized tribes. Not all of them have reservations, but there are numerous reservations here. I first started covering this when I got a press release about Gina Mossbarker's legislation, where she wanted to have State Patrol start collecting data on how many Native women have gone missing. Data has been the issue, and that's in big part because there are jurisdictional challenges for law enforcement on reservations because of tribes' sovereign status. And they are, you know, they are federal, mostly federal. Major crimes are investigated by federal FBI. So what we have seen in the time that I've covered it has been everything from Gina's legislation. Then they had several meetings throughout the state to try to get an idea. The meeting here, we had probably more than 250 people, and it was very emotional. A lot of women came forward and talked about times that they'd been attacked, or they had relatives who were missing, or they had relatives they were worried about, struggling with addiction, and, you know, maybe didn't have transportation, were getting rides with untrustworthy people, which is a big problem. The lack of transportation is a big problem. So I think that over the years, and then Gina put out some new legislation that created 2 tribal liaisons to work with State Patrol. They're hired by State Patrol, and they work with tribes throughout the state to try to come up with an accurate list of how many Indigenous persons are missing. That is, how many cases are active in Washington. And that's the thing. So what we've seen in the last few years is awareness. Much greater awareness. And that's I really want to keep pushing that out there. I think that's really important. There are many factors at play here. But in the past, we've only had, you know, these tiny little stories, woman's body found, Native woman's body found. Then you never found out anything about her, the circumstances of what happened, why, you know, who might have murdered her. And now you can go to Washington State Patrol's website, and you can see a list of active cases of missing Indigenous persons, men and women, it's updated every 2 weeks. They just updated it Monday. So, you know, that's something that just started coming out in March. And so now we have names, and now people can be more aware of who is missing, and that information is shared among law enforcement agencies, and there's more people talking to each other. But the next step now, law enforcement does seem to be responding better in certain ways, But we have decided our coverage needs to get at the root of some of these issues, which is, you know, trauma. There's a lot, there's family trauma, there's generational trauma. Also, we know, I think some of you have seen the coverage of the Kamloops, the tribal school in Kamloops, the residential boarding school where they found the remains of 215 children, and they know there are more there. Well, I don't know if you're aware, but Fort Simcoe had a boarding school as well. It burned, the buildings burned down years ago, but I have heard people say that they think children are buried out there as well. So these are some of the, you know, some of the issues that families struggle with, and this generational trauma, they were forced into boarding schools, they were forced to abandon their religion, they were forced to stop speaking Ichishkin, which is the language that Yakima speak in this area. So we want to get deeper into the root of some of those, and how can that change things? How can that change? More help for people struggling, more help for people who are homeless. Tonight, I'm going to be meeting a young lady who could have been a statistic. She admits she was addicted to drugs. She was an alcoholic. She had 3 children and she lost all of them. She lost custody because of her addictions. She was living in her car. She was living on the streets. And now, 26 months ago, she decided to become clean and sober. And so she's been clean and sober for 26 months. She has regained custody of all 3 of her children, and she's in safe housing. And I get to meet her tonight. And so it can be done, but you know, how can more people get that help? That's where we want to go next, because that's where you change things, among others.
Before you leave the murdered and missing Native Americans, I'm just curious. You know, the tribe is not always easy to work with in terms of, you know, making contacts and so forth. Yeah. Have you had much trouble trying to get to people and getting good source information?
Well, and that's a really good question, Ed, because, you know, my editor, my city editor, Joanna Markell, and I have talked about this before. She lived in Alaska for a while, and that's where she met her husband. He's actually a tribal citizen from a tribe in Alaska. I can't remember exactly off the top of my head. But, you know, she's a really good guide for me on this coverage because, again, before I got here, I never covered anything on a reservation, and I never had to cover any federal cases. That's been new too. I covered city, you know, I covered county and even state cases, but I've never covered federal cases. So what I did, Ed, and this is kind of the way I approach my story, I start from the ground level and I go up. I don't want to talk to the big shot officials on something like this. I want to talk to the people who are impacted, and those are the families, and that's where it started, and that's where I always try to keep this coverage rooted, is in the families, because there's a lot of talk. This is an international issue. This is a huge issue in Canada, the Highway of Tears. This is also a huge issue on the border with Mexico. There are many, many, many Indigenous women who go missing. That's just that area there. And that's kind of where I learned about it first, where the Highway of Tears in Canada. But here I've just kind of started to work slowly with different people. I've worked with advocates who introduced me to family members. And then when those family members decided they wanted to talk for a story, I did the very best I could. I hope that the story had impact. And since then, more people have talked to me. We are seeing also more people come and share their family stories at public events. So far this year, I have spoken with family members of 3 people that I had never even seen photos of before. They were missing. All 3 of those people are missing. Well, one lady was found murdered. I had literally never seen photos of them. Well, their families came to events and they brought photos and they talked about them, and now they want to talk. My thing is, I approach every story with the understanding that people do not have to talk to me. There's no need for them to talk to me. And if they choose to talk to me, I'm going to do the best I can. And that's, again, I try to keep it on the ground level where it matters most, with the people it impacts. And it's taken time. I mean, I've been doing this for going on 3 years now. And some people said they would talk to me. They changed their mind. They haven't talked me yet, and I'm fine with that. So that's kind of the way like I said, I don't start with the top. I start with the real people. That's a phrase that gets thrown around in this business sometimes, not officials, not leaders, but people who are impacted. So I'll continue to do that. So, yeah. So,
And I can follow up with another question, and this has more to do with the state of the Herald Republic right now. And I mean, you can only talk about what you're comfortable talking about, but with they're moving the printing operation out of town here to Walla Walla.
yes,
And I understand that there's going to be there will still be local coverage,
yes.
and the paper's going to lease a new office where I don't know if people are going to be coming in or they're going to continue to work out of their home. Anyway, could you just talk a little bit about maybe at least the immediate future of the Herald Republic and the kind of
Yes.
where it's going?
Sure. Yeah. And we get this question a lot, and understandable. But I also want to throw in here too so this is my 4th paper. 3 of my 4 papers have sold their buildings. The Fort Myers News Press sold its building, scrapped its press. It's part of the Gannett Corporation. And they basically tore down that building and sold the property. And they combined printing with the Naples Daily News, which is also a Gannett paper. My 2nd paper, the Terre Haute Tribune Star, they left their building downtown, which was still new when I was there, and they are leasing space. What my editor explained to me, and what I explain to people is, a newspaper is not necessarily the place, it's the people. And yes, our printing is going to Walla Walla, and yes, our designers are doing more work as far as they're designing the Walla Walla paper. I'm not going anywhere. The other reporters aren't going anywhere. Our building is being sold. It really is too big. We really don't need all that space right now. My architect self tries to think about what other ways it could be used. It's a really cool building. I like it. But it hasn't sold yet as far as I know. It is up for sale. I don't know how much it's for sale for. I'm not privy to that information, which is fine with me. Yes, I have, we will be leasing space, hopefully downtown. I've suggested a few places that I think would be great. I personally don't like working at home so much. I did it for a couple of years, many years ago, and I don't know, I just didn't, I like going to work. For me, going to work now is coming downstairs. As you can see in my basement, this is where I am. But we're hiring reporters, which is kind of an unusual ability in this day and age. And this is partly due to our Microsoft initiative. I don't know if you all have seen that we do have a partnership with Microsoft to try to, we aren't beholden to them. They're working with others, and we're working with the Yakima Valley Community Foundation for some funding models, because this has been discussed in other places. Fresno, if I recall correctly, it has been working with their community foundation to kind of spin newspapers more in a public service direction, I guess, almost like a PBS sort of arrangement, because it is a public service. But I'm not going anywhere. I've told people I'll do this business as long as I can, as long as I feel I can do it the right way, as long as I have a job. I'm thankful for that. But we're still here. We just we'll be in a different place, but we're not going anywhere. We hear all the time how important it is, and we're just going to keep doing it as much as we can. So I'm not going to Walla Walla. I'm still here. I don't want to go to Walla Walla.
Do you know what the circulation is right now? I understand it's like around 20,000 or something. Does that sound right?
Yeah, Ed, I hear everything from 15 to, and they throw all the online stuff in there too. Like, we have some strictly online consumers. I don't know exactly. I would say it's in the teens. Okay. But I can't speak with authority on that. I don't want to know all that stuff. So, I mean, it was kind of cool when I was at the Fort Myers paper, and it was really booming then, and we were up around 120,000 That was by far the biggest paper I've worked at. So, but you know what? It doesn't matter where you are. If you're at the New York Times or if you're at a local weekly, there's always good stories. Doesn't matter where you are. And that's kind of how I approach it. I've told people I don't care how big or small the newspaper is, as long as there's a newspaper that's telling the stories of the local community, they're out there. You can find them. You should be telling them. Have any of you seen the Goldendale paper?
I haven't, I used to see it, but I haven't seen it for quite a while. No.
It's kind of fun. I don't know. I haven't seen it like in hand for a while.
Is that the Sentinel? You got Golden Hills?
Yeah, yeah. I really enjoy those smaller papers and seeing that really local coverage. And then the Flathead Beacon, I believe, is owned by Maury Povich, the talk show dude. They run a police scanner that they filter. They don't run it raw, but they kind of filter it, and it's so popular. I kind of wish we could do something like that because it's hysterical. I mean, you wouldn't believe some of this. We can't make some of this. We could not make some of this stuff up. We could not. So again, I feel we have a lot of local support. I'm thankful for that. I noticed that. I love how lively our editorial page is. We get a lot of letters to the editor. People need to keep them coming because that's a big part of the conversation. Please keep sending those letters to the editor. People love that. Yeah, even as numbers might be going down, we're figuring out what the future is going to hold. And in the immediate future, yeah, it's kind of, I'll miss that building, but I won't miss it that much, I guess.
You know, anybody who reads the Yakima Herald every day, and I read it in paper, I have no interest in online. I'm kind of curious if you could comment on how you decide what the flavor of the front page is going to be. Because clearly, some days it's meant to just tell you everything and get you kind of down. And the next day, it's kind of aimed at, oh my, we hit them pretty hard yesterday. Let's do some upbeat things. And one of the examples that I noticed is, seems to me that in the past, there was maybe 2 or 3 days of graduation stories kind of things.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
right now, I mean, I think you're going on day 9. There's been a front page graduation something or other for like 9 days in a row. And even though I think those stories are pretty wonderful, I'm not really sure they're worthy of the front page for 9 days in a row. So I'm curious how you guys decide that.
Well, it's interesting. We have 2 meetings a day that talk about the news. So we have a morning meeting with our editors. These are the reporters and the editors. We have the executive editor, Greg Halling, the city editor, Joanna Markell, and all the reporters meet at 9:30 every day. It usually doesn't last very long. It's about 15 or 20 minutes. The reporters say what they're working on today. I'll have this story for tomorrow. I'll have this story for Thursday. I'll have this story for next Monday. So I told them this morning what I was working on, which was I am working on a story for Sunday about missing Indigenous men and boys. I don't think it's going to run Sunday, though, but I'm on vacation next week, so I have to finish it. And then this afternoon, I was in Zilla. I will be writing about a family that got an addition on their home thanks to Habitat for Humanity.
Oh,
So
cool.
reporters talk about, yeah, it's super cool. The other reporters talk about what they're doing. We're still monitoring the situation with the Brownstown Tavern, which is a very dark story because that's a very dark place. And there are a lot of bad things that happened there. And there recently was a bad thing that happened there. So everybody says what they're doing. And the editors take that all in. We put it on a document. We say, this is what I'm doing. This is what you'll have for tomorrow. Then the editors meet with the page designers at 4:00. And then that's when it's decided what goes on the front page. And Ed could probably talk about this too. It kind of depends on what's happening that day too. I mean, I had a story some time ago that I worked really hard on. And I always write my stories to be on the front page. Like I want my stories to be on the front page, okay? I do. And it got bumped off the front page because there was an ammonia leak at Zirkle Fruit, which was a big deal. Okay. They had all these people show up in hazmat suits and everything. And then people would be like, oh gosh, well, I felt like I really liked that story that I wrote and I thought it should be out there. And you know what? If the ammonia leak wouldn't have happened, it probably would have been out there. But when we have breaking news like that, it kind of takes precedence. And you know what? A lot of times breaking news is negative or bad. Negative is not exactly, it's just, and it kind of depends. I miss, I don't know if any of you remember this thing called Slice of Yakima. It had like a little Apple logo with it. And they'd be really short stories, maybe 8 or 10 inches. And they were always good news. They were kind of like random stories that didn't really fit in anywhere, but they were usually positive or quirky or we used to run those on the front page every now and then. And we don't do those anymore. And I kind of wish we did because I come across some of those every now and then. Like they don't really fit anywhere. We do try to keep it. I mean, there is good news out there. We don't want people to think that there's not. There's a lot of good news out there. But I can say that when there's bad news, a lot of people read that too.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and I mean, sometimes it directly impacts you, like these shootings that have been going on. Like this is just crazy what's been going on lately. So,
Yeah, it's amazing. It's not just in certain locations in Yakima anymore. It's like there's no location in Yakima that you can't say there's not been a shooting at.
No, and I'm not sure what's the future. They need to get a handle on that. We're not sure exactly what's going on, but clearly something's happening. But that's not my area. I'll leave that to Phil. Phil Farrellito's kind of our gang. I really do try to temper my really dark news with really good news. And some of those kids, when we talk about the graduation stuff, we always try to celebrate people who've overcome big obstacles, I guess. And I haven't written about her yet, but I would like to. There was a young lady who was in chemotherapy for 2 years. She might have died in high school, but she actually survived and she graduated from high school. I want to write about her, but I haven't gotten around to it yet. So, yeah. So it just kind of depends. But in Fort Myers, we would open our budget meetings to the public. I kind of like that idea. Like, I think people should be able to come into these meetings sometimes to see how it works, because I think papers are still a big mystery.
Tell them what a budget meeting is, Tammy. Tell them what a budget meeting is. They probably don't understand the term.
Well, and that's what, so the budget meeting happens at 4:00. That's when the editors get with the copy editors and they plot out the paper. They say where these stories are going to go. And sometimes they make that decision and this story's going to go on the front. And then it turns out it's not such a big deal. So it goes back. Our meeting at 9:30 is really just with the reporters so the editors can get an idea of what they'll have that day. And then again, sometimes stories don't happen. Like I might go somewhere and say, well, I'm going to have this story, but then something happens or I get pulled into another story and we have to readjust. I mean, Ed, that every day's different. That's another one of my favorite things about this business.
News almost by definition is something that happens that's out of the ordinary. And usually that something that happens out of the ordinary is a negative, very often. So, everybody always wants cheerful news on the front page. Well, that's not the nature of news. News is usually when something goes wrong, not right, So,
True.
Yeah.
I have a question. Do you choose the stories that you want as well as the other reporters, or are they sometimes assigned to you? How does that happen?
Well, and that's a really good question. Most of the time we find our own stories. And that kind of depends again on what we're interested in. I'm always actively looking for stories, people profiles. I'm always actively looking for stories about architecture or historic preservation or history. I'm always actively looking for stories related to missing and murdered Indigenous persons. So I have quite a list. It kind of ebbs and flows. I've kind of worked my way down the list and I need to start adding again. Then we get phone calls, we get emails, we get Facebook messages, we get snail mail with story ideas. And then editors assign stories. If I had to break it down by percentage, I would probably say that 80% of the stories we write, 75 to 80% of the stories we write are generated by us. We find them we get them. Sometimes those stories go to the editors and then the editor knows that that's our area of interest, so they send it to us. I don't always think of those as an assignment. The ones I think about are assignments are the ones that I necessarily might not do generally, you know? And that goes with a lot of these COVID stories. This has been a real crash course in health reporting. I just haven't done that much health reporting myself. And boy, none of us have done this much health reporting. So you always do a better job, I feel like, on stories that you are passionate about yourself than what are just given to you. So, yeah.
That's good news that they're going to hire more reporters. That's very good news.
Yes, thank goodness, because I'm telling you, we cannot, and we try to do the best we can to keep local news out there, but there are some stories we just can't get to these days. And COVID coverage is dropping off, which we're all pleased about and for multiple reasons. But at the same time, we're still so busy and there's so many stories that need coverage. We just can't, in a normal week, we just can't so we keep trying. But yeah, we will have more reporters coming. Yay. So, yeah. So does that help with some of the mysteries about newspapers? Like I said, I've always kind of felt like papers are a big mystery. And I think that newspapers should be more open with people and explain how all of these questions that you've had. And, you know, invite more people from the public. We have to have a place that people can come to ask questions and to see what's going on. So I hope that we get a nice place downtown. I look forward to that. I'm hoping. So.
Mary Lou, did you have a question?
I was just going to say, Tammy, that I particularly enjoyed the stories of the graduates, even though there were a lot of them. I just thought that was great. I mean, Kathy, I'm not disagreeing with you. I wasn't looking at whether they were newsworthy. I was looking more at how little we really understand about the graduating classes that are in our high schools, or at least that I do. And, you know, it was, to me, it was a really refreshing focus.
Yeah, no, I wasn't saying it was particularly negative, but rather different. It just used to be that it would be about 3 days worth of those, and then we would get back to regular life. And
well, this is an unusual year. This is not.
Yeah,
This is true.
but sort of posing the question of, oh, is there something out there going on that we need to know about that we're not going to know about because the story is here?
Mhm.
Yeah. I have a question about, you know, on Thursdays, obviously the papers had to be really, really creative during COVID because all the places they want to write about where you can go in town and have fun for the weekend were all suddenly closed. And so we can really use and things like that because entertainment became reading. But there's also a calendar in there that I've recently experienced there showing up for an activity that the paper was told was going to start at 10 o'clock that evidently didn't. And I wonder how easy, once something gets in the community calendar, is it to correct or fix something?
Well, that's a good question. One of the good things about online is we can fix that online immediately, but the print, and again, like yourself, my parents and there are many other people I know, and myself, I like to read the physical paper. Like, I enjoy that experience of reading. I don't necessarily like to stare at my phone all the time. I get aggravated with other people staring at their phone all the time. But we just have to run a correction the next day and hope that people see it. So we try to keep those in the same place in the paper. And we're all human. We make mistakes. We don't like to make mistakes. Sometimes we get incorrect information. Sometimes we're just having a bad day. So
I think my question is more, if something's going to run in the Thursday paper, what day does the paper need to know about a change in order to have it fixed for Thursday?
Good question. Okay, so it kind of depends. If it's going to run in the scene section, it needs to be into us by, the designer starts on that section Tuesday morning. Now,
Okay.
Sacrifices can be made throughout the day on Tuesday and even up until noon on Wednesday. But I personally tell people, we need to have it Monday or Tuesday for the following Thursday. And then if you have a story that you want me to cover, if it's tied to an event, if you want us to advance it, we really should have it in the paper at least a week ahead of time. A week is
Yeah.
kind of the sweet spot. It's not too far ahead that people forget about it, but it's not right before.
Yeah, good.
And then if you want me to come there physically, you better tell me like 2 weeks ahead so I can get it on my calendar.
Sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
I got it. Thank you.
Yeah. Sure.
Well, I've got another question that may come across kind of personal, but do you or reporters get paid by the number of articles you produce, or are you on a monthly salary, or how is that determined? I'm not going to ask how much you make, but
That's a very good question. Okay, so
Not enough.
no one does.
there's a reason why they call it the Daily Miracle, because some days, oh my gosh. Well, and Ed knows this too. I've done a little bit of freelancing. I don't really have time to do any freelancing these days. I have done some freelancing. I wrote a magazine article for the Indiana Magazine of History about the real history behind one of my favorite books, which is An American Tragedy by Theodore Dreiser. You know, that was based on a real court case, even though it is fiction. Dreiser who worked in newspapers. He started in newspapers before he became a fictional writer. He researched and researched. For that particular article, I was paid a flat amount. Some freelance articles you get paid by the word. Some you get paid by the column inch. Newspapers, we get paid a flat salary. And I can tell you, most of the reporters are in a union. So they have to stick to their hours, or they'll get paid overtime and believe me, fairly often it's easy to go over. So we really have to watch that. I'm actually considered management. I've told them I don't really manage people anymore. I just want to be a reporter. And you don't have to call me the big title anymore, and you don't have to, but we all get paid a straight salary. So, and for all I know, there might be smaller papers that do it differently. I really don't know.
The unions today are much weaker than they were, say, 30 years ago.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's different. There's a union here, and then I was in the union in Terre Haute. And I remember some really interesting meetings that we had, but that's been a while ago. Yeah. So we just get paid a straight salary. But again, it could be different for other places. And freelancing is a completely different animal.
Right. Thank you.
Yep.
All right, well, it looks like the questions have wound down.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Tammy, for your presentation. It was certainly interesting.
Good. Well, and honestly, if anybody ever wants to get a hold of me for story ideas or questions or just anything about the paper, they can always get a hold of me. I'm hard to reach sometimes. That's just the nature. I'm in and out. But I welcome questions, emails, Facebook messages, comments, input, insights, all of that fun stuff.
Well, you've always responded to my emails, even though sometimes it takes a few
Yeah,
days,
I'm not the greatest at that.
which, is fine. Which is fine. I think we all recognize you're busy and there's lots of different things coming your direction. So,
Well,
but thank you very much.
thank you
for joining
Thanks,
us.
everyone.
How do we
Thanks,
get your
Tammy.
telephone?
Okay.
Oh, Rex?
Yeah.
What, did you just say something?
Well, how do we get your email and phone number?
Oh, Ed, do you want to, I was going to say Ed, Becky, any of, Mary Lou, if you want to share that with the group.
I've got Tammy's email, so I'll give it to Mary Lou, and Mary Lou can post it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Yep.
So before we end, I want to remind folks, you may have already heard that we're having our first in-person gathering next Tuesday. We're having a picnic at the West Valley Park at 5 o'clock, I believe. We're going to it's a bring your own food picnic. We're not sharing food yet. And we'll have another picnic in July and a third in August, and you'll all be getting emails with information. Most of our small Zoom groups will continue, and the walking group will continue over the summer. Chrissy will be emailing out a survey that you can comment on the presentation.
Yep.
And anything else you want to add, Chrissy?
Look for an email about more about the picnic and more details about that. And we will be at the farmers market this Sunday as well.
Oh, awesome.
Table, so come see Ed and I down there in the morning on Father's Day. Thank you, Ed, for doing that on
Yeah.
Father's Day. Yeah, and Deborah Ann, she'll be joining us too. So
Great.
All right. Well,
Thank
thank
you,
you all for
Tammy.
joining us.
I enjoyed it.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Tammy.
Bye.
Thanks
Bye,
a lot,
Tammy.
Tammy.
Uh,
Bye-bye.
Very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Mary Lou,
Yeah,
you want to give me, I know I have Tammy's email. Do you think is that good enough just to email out to everybody?
I think Taylor that's the
Okay.
best one. You could just double check if Ed has something else, but I do have a phone for her, but probably email's the best.
Okay, I'll put that in the whole thing. Okay, bye-bye.
Okay.
Congratulations, yay.
Well,
Did you
just-
tell Lois already? Woohoo! It's like a fancy.
There was a Yakima reporter there too, so I got
fun.
interviewed. Yeah, it was fun. It
Did
was
you-
quite an experience. I'll never forget it. Okay.
Cool. Did they
Just-
take your picture?
They did, and I was
Oh.
totally shocked. The whole thing was thrilling and surprising.
Yay.
All right,
Okay,
take care.
Okay.
All right, bye-bye.
bye-bye.